Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Craig Wadding, is it Wadding or Waiting?
It's
Wadding.
Wadding, but I
Wadding.
answer to everything. It's okay.
Wadding. All right. Tonight we have a Craig Wadding filling in for Mia Peace tonight. So Mia typically hosts these workshops for creating your first website. And for the most part, this is geared a little bit towards the beginners. But there's always going to be insightful, advice from whoever's teaching, just because sometimes they have different ways of forming their ideas and articulating it and communicating it. So it's always a valuable experience. So Craig is actually going to be starting off. So he actually hosts JavaScript workshops on Wednesdays, and this is going to lead directly into that workshop. So be sure to check that out tomorrow night. Craig, do you want to go ahead and take it away of like a high level overview of what you're going to cover, as well as what to look out for tomorrow?
Yep. So in the JavaScript workshop, we've been talking about trying to do an actual project of some kind. And we were kicking around the idea. We were actually going to discuss it tomorrow night a little bit, but we're going to make a JavaScript calculator. And in part of that process, we have to do the HTML and CSS, which is what you're going to see to interact with this calculator, right? So when I was asked if I could fill in for tonight instead of just doing, like a website thing, I thought it would be a good idea to build this HTML and CSS for this calculator, because most of the things we're going to do are the same things you're going to do to start off to make a static website. But this is actually going to be something that's going to develop into an interactive web app, right? So instead of just going to a page and seeing things, to be able to click on things and see the result of what you click on. So tonight I was going to kind of build this calculator with the HTML and CSS. And then tomorrow night, when we have our JavaScript workshop, if anybody wants to attend that, you can kind of hang out with us and see how to make that calculator functional, right? So when you click on things, it does something, right? And you actually see the relationship between your HTML, your CSS, and your JavaScript and how they all work together. And I just thought it would be a really good, example for people that are especially brand new. You see different tutorials where you're working on JavaScript, but you don't really see what the JavaScript's doing. Or you work on things where you're working on HTML and CSS to see things on the screen, but you don't really see how they interact with changing things, right? So when it asks you to put in your name or to put in your email and you click submit or you click a button, like what makes that process actually do something? Like how are they connected? And I just thought between tonight showing the HTML and CSS, it would help out for the need for this workshop, for more information on how to set up to make something. And then also then to kind of segue into tomorrow night. So if anyone wants to continue this and work out the JavaScript part tomorrow night, that's what we're going to be doing in the other workshops. So I'm sure Melvin can post the invites for that too. We also have a squad called JavaScript Workshop. It's kind of like our little headquarters, kind of our bulletin board for these workshops. So if you join that squad, you can also get those notifications when we talk about what we're going to be doing or other people discussing our plans for the workshop each week. If we have something coming up and you want to know ahead of time, maybe check it out before the workshop. Also, this will be recorded and put on the YouTube channel for Career Karma under workshops. And so will tomorrow night. So if you're watching this, it's recorded. Look for the recording for the follow-up for the JavaScript we're going to do tomorrow. And if you follow along with this, you can actually do this as a project. And I'm not sure, like an end game, if this would be like a portfolio project, something you want to have later to show that you've done, but it could definitely be a good placeholder for now until you work up to build a good app or a CRUD app or something to take its place later, right? I think it'd be a good place filler for the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript, the interaction, and the things that it's going to pertain to it. Now, with that, I do want to say, I did a JavaScript calculator about a year ago. It was one of the first projects I did. This is not a repeat of the project I did. This is actually one I found online, and I'll share that information later if anybody wants it. So I'm going to be recreating one that someone else created, but I just thought it was done a lot more thorough than mine. The visual part of it is very much almost the same as what I did, but the JavaScript side, this one has more functionality. So just so you know, this is not my original creation, but I am going to walk through building it with you guys, so you see kind of the steps in building it. And then again, as we follow up tomorrow, to see how we will take the HTML and CSS that we make tonight and connect that to the JavaScript to make it interact, right? So when you click on something, it works like a calculator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my Visual Studio Code. I'm going to share my screen and start building this out. And then if anybody has any questions, if you don't mind, keep your mic muted in case you have any background noise. But if you have a question, unlock your mic, ask a question. I'll stop where I'm at. We'll talk about it. Okay, if anybody has stuff. So otherwise,
Yeah.
anybody, before we get started?
Yeah. So thank you, Craig. That's a great overview. I think there's a lot of details a lot of people here should be taking advantage of all of these resources, right? So there's actually a difference between having like a tutorial that you walk through online, whether it's like Udemy or a bootcamp, right? Just like those videos, and like having someone, you know, physically like real time live walk through this, and you can stop them whenever, wherever, and ask them more in-depth questions. So this is very valuable. Hopefully you all like have, you know, a lot of things to say. Feedback is always welcome. And I'll also add, because we are starting to get more people to, you know, contribute to the community in general. So use like the learnings that you've gained, like talk about it within the squads, talk about it within discussions. Make sure that the people that haven't been able to, you know, make these events kind of understand the utility and the value that these wonderful events really do bring. So yeah, share it with your friends, and thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I'll hand it over to Craig. So take it away.
Cool. All right, give me a second here, folks. So I use Visual Studio Code as my editor. I'm going to share my screen here. And if I'm not mistaken, I was watching, for some of you that maybe don't know me, but were attending Mia's workshops. I think she was using Visual Studio Code also. So I like it. I recommend it. It's got a lot of extensions, a lot of built-in shortcuts, things like that make it really handy if you're using it as your primary editor. If you're doing like a boot camp or something, or a prep course, sometimes they have a built-in little like IDE that's built into the web page, or a code pen or a Replit or something. So it doesn't really matter what you're using as long as you're able to get the right tools. So can you guys see my screen okay here with the blank VS Code?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, so I'm gonna back up one step. So what we can do is something you can do if you want. You can always, when you're starting a new project, if you have a specific folder in place, sometimes I just start them on my desktop, but you can just create a new folder on your desktop and then just call it whatever you want. So we're just going to call this CK Workshop. We'll just call it Calculator. And then because I have Visual Studio Code, I can actually right click that and open with code. And what that'll do is that's going to start my Visual Studio Code off already with that folder right there, even though it's empty. I'm already inside Visual Studio Code ready to work on that. So anything I add here will actually show up back into this folder right here. And that goes for if that folder was not on my desktop, it could be anywhere else. So let me close these other VSCs. Give me 1 second. I closed the wrong window. I'm sorry. Hang on 1 second. Sorry. I had a bunch of stuff open from earlier, so sorry. I was trying to get rid of some windows. So inside of here, because we're inside of this folder that I just created, it's empty. If I were to go back to desktop and click on that folder, you're going to see nothing inside of it. But we can go right here to new file. You always want to call it index.html when you first start that HTML file. So inside of that folder, if I go back and look, we would see that there's now an index.html file inside of the CK Workshop Calculator folder. And I know that we're going to need another file, a CSS file. I guess we could probably call it style.css. And you notice as I create the .css file or the .html file, they have a different icon next to it because Visual Studio Code recognizes that I'm creating that type of file, and it's going to have it, pre-set up to understand what I'm going to be putting in that file. Okay. Because I know I'm also going to be doing JavaScript, which we won't probably get to tonight in here. I'm going to go ahead and create a JavaScript file, excuse me. Also, and we're just going to call it script.js. And you notice as soon as I created that, how it has a JS next to it here, it knows that that's going to be for JavaScript. So if we go back and now we look at this little file, see how there's something in it. We open it up and there you go. So there's the 3 files we just made. We have our index.html, we have our styles.css, and we have our script, which is going to be for JavaScript. So we don't have to do anything with this. Just going to sit there, go back to our files. So one thing that's nice about Visual Studio Code is something called Emmet. It's built into it. There's shortcuts available. So like if I do just 1 exclamation mark and then hit enter, it's going to build this. It's called a boilerplate. So it's just some basic information to start an HTML file. Document type, language, some meta. Meta stuff is just things rules that apply to this file that are already pre-scaled for the type of content and browser and things like that. When you create this, there's already a head section here. There's already a body, and then inside of the whole wrapper for HTML. So if we were doing HTML, we could start putting things right here. And I think Mia's already gone over this enough. It's pretty basic stuff if you've done any HTML at all. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to start this build on this calculator. So what that's going to involve is in order to get an idea of what this calculator is going to look like, let me just see if I can show you. No, wait a minute. We're gonna build it out a little bit at a time, and you're gonna see this thing kind of, I guess, come to life as we put it together. And as we get the information on the screen, then we will start to see the actual image of the calculator come together. When we work on the CSS, the styling of it, you'll start seeing the shape of the buttons, the numbers on the buttons, the background color, the font color, all that kind of stuff come into play too. So we're just kind of work on this a little bit at a time and kind of talk about it as we do it to understand why, what's happening and why. So give me a second. So one thing we're going to want to do is we know that we want to import and link any changes we make to CSS so that the index.html file is going to use that, right? So it's something you can do inside of the head tags. We want to set up a link using href. Some people call it styles.css, style, whatever you want to call it, as long as it's a CSS file and you know what it is and what it goes to. So we're going to link to that file. I don't know why I can't spell style. Maybe I have no style. I don't know. Okay, and then that is going to just have a closing tag. Whoop.
You forgot the C in style CSS.
Got it. Sorry, my hands are cold. I was outside before I started. Okay, so that is going to link our CSS file here. And then also, we're going to want to eventually have our JavaScript file also, linked to here. Typically, best practice for importing that JavaScript file is you typically want to put it, you'll either put it inside of the head up here, or you could put it at the bottom, outside of the body, but still inside of the HTML wrapper, because sometimes you want the HTML and the CSS to all load up before the JavaScript part kicks in, so that the JavaScript doesn't take longer to load and cause your page to take longer to load. This way you can see the page, see all the styling, see the HTML, see the CSS, but the JavaScript, even if it hasn't fully loaded yet, at least you can see the image. It's not going to break the image up when it's trying to load on your screen. In this scenario, most of the JavaScript that's going to happen is not going to happen until after we start interacting with the calculator. So I'm not terribly worried about it being at the top on this, but just to explain why there might be times you might see it, or usually you'll see it at the bottom, but sometimes you'll see it at the top. So we got our script.js, which is our JS file. And we have an opening and closing tags for script. That's where your JavaScript, if you were doing inline JavaScript, which is not convention, but you can do it. But in this case, it's basically just importing in the other file that we have in the same folder, so it knows to use that for everything that's run in here. So. Now, there's a few things, we're going to build this out, and we know that with a calculator, like most calculators, you're going to have your numbers. You're going to have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You're going to have a plus, an equals, a minus, a divide. This one's actually going to have a decimal point, and it's going to have a delete button and an all clear button too. Once we start building it out, you'll start to see it. Another nice thing about using Visual Studio Code, and hopefully this will work on the screen share. We'll see here in a second. Once you have started your HTML, if you have live server installed as a extension on your Visual Studio Code, you should be able to right click and say open with live server, and it's going to open another browser that is basically your local IP address here, your route for that host, so that once we start putting stuff in here, it's going to show up over here. And if I'm not mistaken, I think from what I saw on Mia's thing, people that were in Mia's walkthroughs before, I think she used something similar, right? Didn't she do live server to show you while she was doing that? Can you guys see?
Yeah.
The live server screen. I don't know. Can you see both windows here?
Right now, I can only see that one of your Visual Studio Code.
Right. Let me see if I can share them both. 1 second. Yeah, the little border is only showing up to show one. There's got to be a way to show the whole thing.
And maybe if you go to, hold on a sec.
I think last time I did this, I was using OBX or something, so I wasn't using Zoom to share the whole thing. You know what I mean? So it was showing my actual entire screen.
So when you do it, you can actually pick multiple windows
when I share?
Yeah, you go to the share option, and then there's like 6 or 7 windows that
Yep.
you can click multiple ones. And it depends like how your desktop kind of works, but you can do like the split screen, like half and half.
Yeah, that's I've got it split screen right now, but it's only the share is only bordering around the VSC.
You should be able to select.
Yeah, it's not.
Oh, if you do like the split screen on one, do you have like multiple selections for Zoom? Like you'll have like one window that's open, another window that's open.
I've got 3 monitors, and right now, like I can select my Visual Studio Code, or I can select the other screen, like right here. See, this is the blank. But I want to say, I
Okay.
want to have.
Now, are they both open on one monitor,
Yes.
and
I've
you're
got 'em
only
both.
able to do interesting?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure. I know there's got to be a way to do it.
Yeah. So the way I know that you're not on a Mac, but on like the way that it works on a Mac is if you have on one like monitor, if you have like the 2 windows open and they're split screen, it'll actually show as 2 different split screen windows within the Zoom options. Like, so you can click on one of them and it has the half screen.
Well, I'm going to have to figure that out later, and I apologize for not realizing ahead of time that I was going to be doing that. I wouldn't be able to show that. I will figure that out for next time. But for now, I'll just jump back and forth between the 2 screens. Sorry about that, guys. Let me just get on with the show here. We'll add some stuff here. I'll jump over to the other screen, let you see it. We'll refresh, and then if I can figure out how to show, because I've got them both on the same screen right now in front of me. They're just not. It's only the border's only wrapping around one at a time. So,
are you able to extend that border by any chance? Maybe try dragging it.
I tried. It's just a green border around what I'm showing, and if I extend it, it just extends the
Okay.
editor itself. It's not taking up the other one. So
Okay, we'll just
I know
figure
there's
that out later.
I know there's a way to do it, and I'm sorry I didn't realize that
I'm
was
watching
good.
the debate. It's coming on channel 2.
So
Oh, well, hold on.
anyway,
All right, yeah, go for it.
so inside of the body, we are going to create a div that is going to be pretty much a wrapper for the whole calculator. We're going to use some classes for some of this. Now, some of this is already, we know at the end result what we're trying to do with this, right? So there's some basic things you could set up, and as you go through and change, sometimes you have to modify how you're dividing up the different divs and the divs inside of divs and different classes, how you label them, because later when you want to use your selectors for your CSS to specifically change CSS attributes for a certain thing, you will call them, you will specify them by naming them certain type of classes, so you can point at them later, right? So you can point at all divs, or you can specifically create divs that are called a certain thing so that you can change the attributes of just those. Because we know that we're going to have multiple like shaped buttons or multiple functions and different things, I'm going to build this out, and we're going to specify what they're called kind of as we go, instead of coming back and changing them all just to make them unique, right? So inside the body, we made one div. We're going to make it a class called Calculator Grid. Inside of that, we're going to do another one.
Are you video chatting okay with it? Is it speed?
Okay. And just to throw this out there, and I'm just so you guys know, I have a pinched nerve in my left shoulder, so my left hand, the smallest two fingers of my left hand, I usually can't even feel. So when I'm typing all clumsy, I just want you guys to know, I promise I actually know how to type. But it's amazing when you can't feel your fingers. It's like you don't always know if
Oh
you're.
man. Yeah, I get that when I sleep sometimes. Interesting.
Yeah, I've got a impingement in my shoulder joint, and it's like really weird, and I've been working on it, and it's not got any better. So I'll explain what these are here in a second. Just let me get these built out here real quick. There's a purpose for each of these, and we'll go over that. And I've already messed up. Hang on a second.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Perfect. I just had a quick question. Is this available from the start, or is there something like this tutorial on YouTube?
Yes. Yep. I found this tutorial on YouTube. I mean, I could just sit here and throw the whole thing on screen, and then we could just go, hey, look, it's a picture of a calculator, right? But usually when we do these, if we walk through them, talk through them, then it's a better understanding, especially for people that are new on how this stuff. It's not as much how to do it, but why it does why are we doing what we're doing and how it works, right? And typically that's a good way to get the thought process in your head. So later when you want to make something on your own, you understand how you got there in the first place. And sorry, I distracted myself. I think I realized what's going on here. So this is inside of this first div class. So we've got a closing tag. So yeah, in a perfect scenario, if they wouldn't have asked me 4 hours ago if I could fill in tonight, this might have went a little differently. But right now, I am totally walking through this, building it out based on the that video. And when we're finished on the comments for the what do you call it, the description on the YouTube video, we can put the actual the GitHub repo for it. So if anybody wants to go and actually get to the code and work on it themselves, they can, or build this out yourself, or you can watch this and build it as we build it, however you want to do it.
Thanks, Melvin. I appreciate that.
Okay, so this one here. Like I said, I could have just like copy and pasted this whole thing on here. Probably would have been quicker at this point, but I want to be able to explain as we go why these different sections are here and what they're for. If that makes sense. You guys are used to Mia just like gliding through all this stuff and doing it, and I'm sorry. But so we've got the body, the tags for the body from here to here. Inside of that, we've got another div class for calculator grid. Inside of that, we have another class for output. Inside the output, we're going to have the previous and current operator. And imagine that on a calculator, that top portion, right, where the blank screen is. So as you start typing in numbers, you'll see the numbers fill up into the output section on a calculator. And when you go and you add an operand, like plus, minus, whatever, and that pushes that first number up into the top as it adds the second as you're inputting it, this is basically what this is going to show us. And as we develop this and save it and then look at the other screen, you'll be able to see this kind of coming to fruition as we get closer. Okay. So, when you make a button on CSS, you call it a button. If you're using grid, as you do the CSS for that too, you'll be able to customize, the font and the size and different things. What we're doing right here is I'm basically just throwing a couple buttons in here. This button, we don't have to call anything specific. We're putting a little bit of HTML in there for DEL for delete. This one here is going to be, so that's going to be division, but I got to find the symbol for it. And copy and paste a little bit here. So it's going to have division, and then, yeah, if you guys have questions or whatever, you want to talk amongst yourselves a little bit while I'm just kind of knocking all this out, and then we can go over it some more. I just feel like now, interestingly enough, there's actually a shortcut, and I can't remember what it is right now. I'd probably waste more time trying to figure it out. But there's actually a shortcut if you want to make multiple tags or elements for HTML. There's actually you can use like a multiplier. So like if you wanted 10 of these buttons pre-created before you label them, there's actually a shortcut for that, and I can't think off the top of my head what it is, and I didn't have time in getting ready for this to look it up. If I find that later, I will. Oh my gosh. I'll find that later, and I'll put it into the comments from this YouTube video. Okay. Because there is, I think it's through Emmet. It's a way you can, like, if you know you're going to have 10 buttons or 10 like list items or whatever, you can pre-do that, so you don't have to sit here and copy and paste the button tags over and over and over. If anybody knows what that is offhand, please shout it out. Otherwise, I will. I'll put it in the comments later. And let's see, one more. This one's going to be. It's going to be our equals. So. I think we have the right amount. Nope. Okay. So if everybody's still here, what we've got is a button for each number, each operand. We've got one for delete. We've got one for all clear. We've got one for equals. And there's one more thing I need to do really quick. because this doesn't exist on my keyboard, I need a little divisible symbol. Yay, there he is. This little guy right here. Thank you, Google. I found it. So these are going to be our buttons on the calculator. We've already designated the one for AC for all clear and the one for equal as a class because we want to specify something different about them. In this case, like we called them span 2, because when we use the grid, we want those buttons to be bigger, right? So we're already building this out. We already know that we want those buttons to be bigger on a calculator. So if I jump over, and this is the part that's bugging me because I wanted you guys to be able to see this as we do it. I'm going to switch over to our other screen. Can you guys see that? Can you see this page here?
Yes, I can see it.
Cool. Okay, so right now what we did is we just, over here in the HTML, which now you can't see, but we just created all these buttons. So there's our AC, there's our delete. So all clear, delete, divide, 1 through 9, subtract, decimal, 0, and equals. Okay.
You're missing the plus sign.
Do we need that? Do we really need a plus sign on our calculator? I'm just kidding.
I'm just trying to help you out, Craig.
You are helping me out because I somehow in my arithmetic I decided that we never needed to add anything for math. Okay, so you see a plus sign now? Did he show up? And the reason why is he not here? Right here?
Yes, I lied.
Okay.
Sorry. Yes, I see it.
Are we missing any others? Yes, we are. We're also missing, let's see, we're missing the multiplies. I was so worried about finding that little divisible dividing symbol that I forgot about everybody else. So, and the reason why this looks kind of weird, like, wait a minute, these aren't in any respectable order, is because this is how they're going to be. This is the order they're going to be in from top to bottom on a calculator, right? When you look at a keypad or a calculator, usually these is going to be the order they're in. So something doesn't seem correct though. Let's see here. We're going to go with it. So it's equal. So now we want all those weird buttons that are on that screen, but we want to actually start lining them up, right? So we want them to look a certain way on our screen. We want to put them in order. We want to change the size of them. We want to change the font, the color, all these things. Let me check chat real quick. I'm sorry, I hadn't been looking. Okay. Yeah, if you guys have questions, just like you said, unmute and just ask, and I'll try to answer as quick as I can.
You're missing the percentage as well.
Yeah, Lauren said you're missing a percentage.
If we were making a calendar with a percentage, it would be there, but we're not. So that's something else. Huh?
The calculator has a percent on it.
Well, there's also calculators that have pi and square roots and a lot of other stuff. And I actually meant to mention this earlier. So the JavaScript calculator I made like forever ago didn't have a decimal, didn't have delete. It was more basic, right? So if you create your own JavaScript calculator, or any calculator, there's multiple ways you can do it, right? If you've owned calculators, so you have a calculator on your phone, if you have a little tiny little cheapy calculator that came on a bookmark or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Everybody's had those little throwaway little calculators you got somewhere, right? From your insurance guy or something. So you'll notice that not all calculators are the same. they don't always have all the same functions and features. This particular one, I'm sorry, does not have a percentage on it. It has, plus, minus, multiply, divide, and which is okay, because the whole idea for doing this is learning how to put stuff on the screen. When we get to the JavaScript and we're worried about the math behind the scenes and how the functions of JavaScript do all the calculations, I'm sure percentage could be another thing that could be added to this. I mean, you could probably, make the equal sign half the size, leave room for another button, add one more button, call it the percentage button, and then create a function in JavaScript that would calculate percentage, just like these other ones do. So good catch, but there's not going to be a percentage button on this one. Cool. Like I said, you could, Melvin will vouch for me. I had like 4 hours notice maybe to even know I was doing this tonight. So,
yeah, Craig, you're amazing for this, by the way. Thank you.
All right. So I'm trying, folks. Just bear with me. Okay. I promise this is going to come together. It's going to make sense when we get there. So thank you. So now, since we've got a little bit of something to work with and we got it on the page over here, we're going to go back to our Visual Studio Code. I wish there was a way you could just switch screens instead of having to stop sharing and then go back, but it is what it is. So back to code. So now we're going to go over to our CSS. We're not going to do anything else for HTML yet. Got a couple more things we're going to change in here later. We're going to add to these buttons. We're going to make them more specific later so that we can keep our JavaScript selectors and our CSS selectors kind of separate, just to not make it confusing. So for now, just get some stuff filled in here. There might be a Emmet shortcut for doing this too, but I'm just going to go ahead and get this in here just to get going. So when you're working on your CSS, there's certain things that are kind of like Meta is with your HTML, but things that you can pre-set up that's kind of Meta for your CSS also. So we're going in here and we're just presetting some of this up for our CSS. So our font family, the border, and the font weight, etc., is already set up. Then with our CSS, because we want to select the body tags and specifically customize what's going to happen with everything inside the body on our CSS, that's where we use body, curly brackets, and inside the curly brackets, we're going to set specifics for that particular section, right? So padding right now, we're just going to set to 0 because we want it to fill, we want the body of what we build here to fill the whole screen. We don't want any gaps around the edge. Same thing with margin. Not to be confused with margarine. Now with the background, this is something that you can do whatever you want, right? On the background, you could make the background a specific color. Technically, I mean, you could import an image from a site online. You could add another folder, like call it images. You could call it whatever you want, and you could import the image from that folder where you put it to have like a picture in the background. You can use colors, you can use gradients. You can almost do whatever you want, right? So for this one, I'm just going to stick with this walkthrough just to keep it consistent. If you go linear dash gradient, I don't know if you guys noticed, by the way, when I'm typing this in, did you notice how my code editor will autofill and give me options? So as I'm typing this in, it knows, or it's smart enough to know that I'm probably going to be typing in one of these things, right? And if that first thing shows up, all I have to do is hit tab and it will autocomplete that. Or I could have went down arrow a couple times and picked one of those other options. So just another shortcut with using like a code editor or extensions or Emmet, etc. Right? So what I'm telling this to do now is to use linear gradient and fade to the right, and I'm going to put in two different colors here. So I'm going to do, like I said, just to stay consistent with this one. These are just two different color formulas that exist, right? Be running out of room. And right now, that's all we're going to need just for now. So now if I jump back over to our screen, because of what we just changed in the CSS, now you see how the color in the background is no longer white, and it used those two colors that we set, and that gradient has done like a fade from one color to the other to the right. Does that make sense? You guys saw how we did that? Anyone?
Yes, I saw.
Okay. Give us some more room here. Now, if we go back to our HTML and we look at the different tags that are in here, we've got a couple of these div classes that we specifically call different things, right? So we have like calculator grid, output, previous operand, current operand, and then the different buttons. So as we start customizing the CSS, we're going to be referring back to some of those specifically. And if you're familiar with CSS, or if you've just started with it, whenever you're doing a selector on a class, you basically will use a period and then the name that you specified that class, right? So we called that one calculator grid. So now we're basically going to customize that CSS for what's going on with the actual grid itself, right? Because we want to move all these little buttons around to where they actually look like a calculator. Right now they're just all these little buttons just floating out there in nothing. Catch up a little bit. I know we haven't covered a lot yet, but anybody have any questions or anything, any comments or questions? Has anybody created something yet? Like how many people are brand new versus how many people have had a chance to actually, and I'm not talking about like go through a tutorial, but has anybody ever played around and just put stuff on a web page and just played around just to see where it goes?
Brand new.
No, but I'm excited to. I also have
Okay.
a question. I don't
Yeah.
know. So I see where you have like index, style, and script, and it's all like fancy color coded and stuff like that. And
Oh, yeah.
it's so I'm looking at mine right now, and it's all black and white.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
how do I?
Yeah. Are you? What are you using for an editor? Are you using Visual Studio Code?
Yes.
Okay, that's cool. You can do one of a couple things. So you can go into your settings and you can go into your color. There's different color oh man, I can't think of the word. They're pre-made color schemes, right? Like,
Okay.
so you can go in there. There's some that are built into VSC already.
Yeah.
So you can go in there and select them, like Dracula and different ones. Like if you like a darker theme or a lighter theme, some people like a white background with letters. I prefer the
Right,
dark
right.
background. I will just show you real quick. Why not?
And so in order to get everything coded the right way, like with JavaScript and stuff, I was trying to download it while you were kind of building everything up from scratch. So for instance, how do I get my index HTML to code the HTML? Same thing with JavaScript and all those things. Is there an extension that I need to download? Is that making sense? I don't know if I'm
I think I know what you're saying. When you first create the file, right? Like when we first started, I don't know if you were here. Right? So when I specifically name this file .html, it knows that I'm going to use that file for HTML. I mean, primarily.
Okay.
It doesn't necessarily mean that I can't use CSS or JavaScript on this file, but if I did JavaScript, I would have to put it within script tags to recognize it as JavaScript. And for CSS, when you do, I don't do much inline CSS because you're going to find as you're learning, right? There's going to be things that are considered best practice, right? Like what you can get away with doing in the learning process for a tutorial or beginner stuff, and what you would be expected how to do it at a job or like even as a professional or freelancer or whatever. There's certain things that are just expected when you're working with this language or this type of file or that type of file. There's just like a professional, and I'm sorry, I'm not finding the right words to describe this. Best practices considered. So what you do want to do is try to pick up on what those are as you learn. And most schools, boot camps, tutorials, Udemy courses, anything, they'll mention that, like, hey, I'm using camel case here because that's best practice for JavaScript. I'm using snake case for Ruby because for Ruby that's best practices, right? So there's going to be certain ways of typing code that's cleaner, code that looks nicer. Even the indentions, when we do the tabbing over and we separate for the divs and the indentions, you could have every one of those, if I'm not mistaken, perfectly lined up in a row, and that code's still going to run the same. You put in those little tab overs to try to visually give people the understanding that this is inside of this. It's nested, or it's like one of those Russian little shell dolls, right? Yeah. So as you code and the tabs, and there's even people that talk about like spacing 2 spaces instead of 4 spaces in certain languages, you'll pick up on that as you go. But back to your color thing, if you go in your settings on Visual Studio Code and go under color themes, or I guess here you can hit Control K, Control C. These are some of the themes that are already built into there, and you can change them. Okay. So like there, I just switched to Abyss, right? Can you see it? Yeah. So even when I copy paste, look, it's all red. It's all kind of cool looking. So now I forgot which one I had set before, but I guess it doesn't matter. But you can also import, like you can look up and find other themes that other people make, and you can import them and stuff, just like Google Visual Studio Code color themes, and you'll find like all kind of cool ones, Skittles, whatever your preferences are. So can you guys still see this okay, or do you want me to change it to something else?
I think you had it set on like the default, whatever the default was.
I thought I had it set on a custom one, but we'll see. Let me just go to dark. I don't know, you guys, as long as you can see it okay. Anyway, we got to move on here. We've almost been on an hour. So let me see if I can get some more of this CSS done. So now let me jump over to, I'm going to show you just on this calculator grid, because we did display grid because we're using CSS grid. So it has to know that, right? Just like if you do Flex, if you ever heard of Flexbox, you have to tell it what display that you're using. and then justify content, center, align items, center. So what that's going to do when I switch over here to the other screen, the hard way, sorry, is now do you see how our buttons are no longer at the top of the screen going left to right? Now they're
Right.
actually centered, right? So we want our we're going to have our calculator centered. So for starters, the grid itself, we have it in the center of the screen. And then now as we customize the CSS some more, we're going to change it some more and change it some more, and we're going to put it where we want it. So just for the sake of time, because I know some of you guys, I don't expect you to be here like for 3 hours doing this. I am going to try to get some of this. I'm just going to hammer out some of this, some of the CSS. Okay. Just so you guys can see, because you can always like watch this later recorded. You can always find the, get the code on GitHub, look at it later, work on it yourself later, et cetera, too. Come on. It's always funny too, because when you're, it's like when you're working on stuff yourself, you're just like doing whatever, you're just working on stuff. You make a mistake. Okay. Oh, well, I got a backspace. Oh, I got a typo. But I swear, man, when you're doing it and you know that there's like 20 people watching you, it's like, I mean, it is what it is.
Letting the pressure crack into the psyche, huh, Craig?
I maybe, man. You guys worked me too hard today, is what it was. No,
yeah, and also feel free, because this was scheduled to be from 5 to 6, so don't feel like any pressure to continue this.
Well, I there's not a ton of this to do. I think it's going to be, even if we didn't finish it, I mean, it could be something we could definitely, even have a second version of this to finish it. I was really hoping we could get it all done in one, but it's part of the fact that I didn't have a lot of time to get ready for it. By the time I got done working and then tried to hurry up and grab some supper before we started, whatever.
Right. Yeah. So don't worry about it. I mean, we could always pick up next week, like even a little bit of that tomorrow as well. Because I do want to be like cognizant of your time as well.
Yeah.
But if you want to continue, go for it.
I'm willing to keep going if everybody else wants me to keep going. You guys okay with this? I know I'm one of these people where I try really hard, but sometimes I don't get stage fright. I'm really not nervous or anything like that. It's just, you know what it is? I think it really is, to be honest, like a version of the, what do you call it? Imposter syndrome, right? It's like you think you know what you know, but then when you're being watched by other people, then all of a sudden you're not really sure if you know what you know, right?
Yeah, and so actually this process and as like our community starts growing and more people like step up, just like Craig has so graciously done, you guys actually get to practice this, right? Because articulating like concepts and like ideas and like being able to explain code like very articulately is actually a lot more difficult than it is like when you're doing it by yourself, just like Craig was saying. And so hosting workshops just like this is actually also helpful for you guys to understand like the fundamentals of what it takes to build a web app just like we're doing right now. So keep that in mind, because I know a handful of you guys in the chat right now are for sure going to be leaders in the career karma community, just like Craig.
Well, and that's part of it too. Honestly, that's the other part of why I do this, is because I feel like the more that you put yourself out of your comfort zone, right? I mean, I'll just ask you like this. Does every single person in this room right now, if you can hear me, would you be willing to get up here right now and finish this for me? Or you know what I'm saying? Like if you feel like, oh no, you go ahead, there's no way I would try to do anything in front of a bunch of people, then maybe that's something you need to think about. Like, how can I get better at that? Like, what can I do? Because there's going to be a time where you're going to get through all this and then you're going to go to like interview for a job and they're going to say, oh, here, code all this stuff. You know, here, jump on this laptop and show us how you would do this or you would do that. And if you've never had to do it in front of people before, you know, you're gonna have to learn. Unless you're going to be a freelancer and like just build websites and nobody's going to ever actually have to see you, you know, see you code, right? And I'm going to explain some of this stuff right now. I'm just trying to get it all. My dog is like huffing and puffing over here. It's not me struggling to type that I'm breathing that heavy. I swear it's my dog over here. If you guys can hear him. So let me just save that, stop right there. And we're going to jump over and take a look, and I'll come back and we'll explain what this stuff is doing, right? So this is what I've been typing in has done to our little row. So now you notice that our little row they're all still somewhat centered, but they're no longer going up and down, right? So they're no longer vertical. Now they're starting to separate off into kind of rows, right? But they're still like all over the place, right? Can you guys see this okay?
Yeah, it's looking good.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, we're not there yet, but it's starting to look more like a calculator, right? Sort of in a Picasso, if Picasso were to make a calculator, right? So again, I apologize. I really would love to be able to show both of these screens at the same time so we could do stuff and you'd see it kind of go, but for another time. So basically what we did is by setting up the body here, basically that was just the entire back page of the thing, right? The background color and where everything's going to go. Then when we specified the grid and using CSS grid, and these are things I highly recommend if you're going to do much CSS, if you're going to do web design, websites, Flexbox, CSS grid, Grid Garden, Flexbox Zombies, all these different little free gamified things that help you learn how to move stuff around in your CSS. Highly recommend you practice and work on those because you will be using some variation of one of those, whether you're using float or flex or grid or something with CSS, you're going to want to know how to use that. So what this did is it kind of set us up to use a grid system, centered it, also set up the height, the columns and the rows, and basically the size of the pixels, etc., and how to set these up to where they made multiple rows. Okay, again, that's almost for a whole nother lesson with using like CSS grid. I recommend googling, finding something on CSS grid, watching YouTube videos, whatever on CSS grid. It makes it so much easier. So then inside of all that information, inside the calculator is the buttons themselves. So you remember back here, we have all these buttons, right? They're all button tags. So when we refer to button here, we're talking about these. So you might not have noticed it, but like on my screen right now, you see how my cursor is this like little bracket thing as I'm moving it around? If we jump back over to our soon-to-be calculator, look at the cursor here. So on the screen, it's an arrow, but when we mouse over a button, you see how it turns into the little pointy finger, and also you see how the buttons are changing color. I hope you guys saw that because I'm moving back. Well, there it is right there. So here's your button. Cursor, what kind of cursor? A pointer. Font size, we changed the font size. The border around the buttons, if you notice when we look at the buttons, they're kind of like a bluish gray with like a little tiny white outline around them. That's all here. Here's our little 1 pixel white border. Outline none, background color, this little slight gray here. Okay, so what happens is on hover, that background color actually on hover will show up. Okay, and the difference between 0.75 and 0.9 is the gradient. So that's a percentage, like how much it goes through. Then for the span 2, some of the buttons we wanted to be bigger, and we're going to specify more with them. So like we've got the all clear and the equals button, and on the face of the calculator, those are going to be bigger than the others. So we're kind of setting that up to be different. But let me jump back real quick to here. And here's what I'm talking about. See on the on hover, how the color changes, right? But that's why we're doing this too, because if you watch as we go through this, these are the different little increments and changes that we're doing that are causing the CSS changes we're doing is what's causing what we're seeing over here on this screen to change, right? Because I'm trying to make this easy enough to understand for like super beginners. So if you've more familiar with this and you understand a lot of it, I mean, I appreciate your patience, but there's still a lot of people that this is all new to, right?
I have a question real quick.
Yeah.
I don't know if you explained it already. The calculator grid and the greater than sign and button. Why was that necessary to have that greater than sign in the middle of it?
I think it's because the calculator grid was designated as its own class. Well, let's go look at it. So the calculator grid is a class div, right? So it was already set up as here, but that button is inside of that div. So if rather than just specify button, we actually, I think that is just showing that like that is pointing to the buttons that are inside of this div class calculator grid. See how when I because of my editor, this is another thing I love about it. You see how it brings up this little box and it shows me the element class calculator grid and button, right?
Yeah.
So it's being specific. It's pointing within a class to another element that's inside of that class. I'm pretty sure what that means because like I said, this is not my original stuff, right? The last thing I'm going to do is sit here and pretend like this is something like, hey guys, I just threw this calculator together just to show you, all right? I'm not saying that I couldn't have worked all this out, but I didn't. Because this guy, and like I said, I'll share the YouTube walkthrough with you for later, but this guy does a really good job, better than I'm doing, of explaining it. And actually, I thought about this before. I got to quit doing that. I don't know why I do that. I'm up here trying to show this. I'm hoping somebody gets something out of it. The self-deprecating jokes on myself are unnecessary. I'm my worst critic. You know how that is? But, you know, when you want to do a good job, and you want to help out, then, you know, sometimes you got to critique yourself.
You're doing great, Craig. Don't worry about it.
Okay. I do this every video. Like, oh, I'm sorry, everybody. I'm sorry. I'm so terrible at this. So, did I mention I rarely do CSS anymore? Like with school and stuff right now, it's not what we're doing.
I would say, remember, we're watching your performance, though. You know. Really
yeah. Good. No, thank you. Right now, this is some high quality coding of you watching me just like type a bunch of code in here. And I'm going to explain what we're doing here in just a second. So earlier we used grid, right? We set the display for grid. Well, now we're going to use something called Flex. And again, if you're going to be doing HTML, like a lot of HTML or doing websites and things like that, I would highly recommend you take some time and check out CSS Grid and Flex and Flexbox. Okay, because that is what will help you a lot easier to position stuff around on the screen. There is my notorious freezing up computer back again. The mystery driver that I can't seem to figure out why it just wants to freeze. Probably some stupid Windows thing. Doesn't happen on my laptop with Linux, I'll tell you that. It's good. Okay. We're getting there, folks. We're getting there. I'll explain some of this other stuff. Let me save this and kind of back up. So with this output, right? Output is our little screen that shows like on a calculator where you see the numbers. And as you type in the numbers, you see the numbers change, right? Well, we want the column to go the full length of the screen, depending on as we fill stuff in. We're going to have it be black. It's going to have a little bit of gradient to it. We're going to use Flex because we want to move around where the stuff is positioned. Sorry. Space around columns. So that's going to basically set it up because we want it to be centered also. Has a little bit of padding, so it's always going to have a little bit of gap between it and the rest of the buttons. And then this part is pretty cool. Word wrap and word break. What that is as we type in the numbers, like, so we're doing a big number. Have you ever sent a text and when you sent the text, half of the word was on one line and the other half was on another line? And it didn't like necessarily have like the little hyphen to let you know it was breaking the word for the next line. What this will do is it will always create another line if it has to. If you made a number in this calculator that was like 700 numbers long, it'll just keep making another line. It'll continue that number to the next line. It won't break it. It won't put a break in it. So that's why we have this in here. Then inside of that same thing, we're going to have two different outputs. It's going to show the number we're currently typing in. It's going to show the number that was previously typed in, right? So that's why we have a previous operand and we'll have a current one. So give me just a second here. And we're almost done, believe it or not, so bear with me. The next part would be for the JavaScript, which we're not going to do till tomorrow. So previous operand, color, RG, yay. Let's keep this one the same. I think, here we go. It's just out of curiosity, is anybody else trying to replicate what we're doing here on their own besides who was saying that earlier? Or who else was trying to, we were talking about the colors and stuff earlier.
I think it was Lauren.
No, it was one of the fellas. He was asking about the color background. Anyway, is anybody else trying to replicate this? And if you are, How is yours? What's that?
I'm doing it too.
Are you doing it? Is yours starting to form up? Like, are you starting to see stuff on your screen that's starting to start to look like a calculator?
Yeah, pretty much so. Kind of looking a little like yours, like it's laid out.
Okay.
Columns and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious to see if anybody else was doing it, just to see how you were doing, if you had got stuck on anything. You know what I'm saying?
The only difference operators are in different spots than yours, I think.
Okay.
Operators on the left, mine on the right.
Yep, they're going to end up on the right. And why is this being weird? Okay, sorry. Hang on. I think we just have one last thing here to put. The beauty of this is you can just find this on YouTube later and just put me at double speed and they'll be like, yeah, I'm done. Done in 10 minutes.
Double speed is the way of life.
Oh yeah.
For sure.
Best way to use Audible. Get a lot of books read quick. I feel like I'm missing a semicolon expected. Let's just see what happens. I feel like something's missing here. Semicolon.
I think you're missing a semicolon after the, yep, right there.
Right here. Yep, there you go. I knew it. I got that feeling. The infamous semicolon. It's like the going snipe hunting. Also, if you hadn't noticed before too, like us using live server, right? So we opened this other browser, and of course, yeah, I got to keep switching back and forth between two to show you. But you see how helpful that is as you're making changes, how you can refresh. I shouldn't even say refresh, because this actually, I think it's with the VS Code, will auto refresh. So as soon as you hit save on VS Code, you'll see that other screen change, right? So it's nice to be able to see your stuff in action. So output. I feel like something is amiss, but we'll keep going. Okay, I'm going to double check here. Sorry, guys, I'm just going back through here because I think I might have missed something somewhere. Does anybody have any questions right now while I'm looking this up? Let me this. Okay, so we're getting there, pretty close. Something is still off. Okay, all right, there we go. Okay. It's funny, all it takes is like one mistake. That's why you want to save regular and often. Okay, so here we go. Can you guys, wait, which screen am I on? Can you see the calculator now?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we go in, there's a placeholder area in HTML. I think it's with, let me me try right here and see if this works. My dog is tripping out. Yeah, there we go. So you can't see, but I'm back in the code, and in this previous operand div, let me just show you here. So this is going to be the previous operand, and then this is going to be the current operand. Let me save that, and there we go. So basically, you can't see it now because this isn't a functioning, the JavaScript part isn't done. But up here is going to be where the previous number is put in and then the current, right? I just threw in some text over here just so you see where that would show up, right? Maybe I'll do it like this, where it looks like more like a, what you might see on a calculator screen, just for now. I just wanted to get this complete so we can talk about it before we just stop and we're not finished, right? Okay. So what I did is I'm going to jump over here, show you real quick. My dog really wants to go outside. Okay, so right here, in between the class name and the end tag for this div, I just put in these zeros. Okay, I could have put anything here. I could have put hello world. I could have put whatever. And what that allows us to do is then see it show up here just as a placeholder so you guys see where these numbers are going to go, right? So what we did very painfully, and I appreciate y'all sticking with me while I did that, but what we did was we created the HTML, so all the text that's involved here, right? All the buttons as we name them in between the button tags by putting the 1, 2, 3, the numbers, the operands, everything else, they're showing up here. When we went into the CSS, and we were specific about how we, changed what we wanted the CSS to do, to center everything, to do the colors, do the background colors, create the buttons, the hover over, the font size, even this little border in between, if you can see that little like off-white border that goes between the buttons, right? So right now what we have is a picture of a calculator, and on hover, the changing of the color, and obviously any of the colors in this whole project, you could go back and change whatever you want, right? The color in the back could be different. The buttons could be different. The background could be different. The font could be different. None of that matters. That's all just you customizing it how you want it, right? So this is all of the actual HTML. There's a little bit more adjusting of the, this will go on the next, when we do the JavaScript, right? But when we look at the code for this, when we get back to the HTML, we will customize the names of some of these buttons in here, just so that the JavaScript selectors will work on them. When we want specific, like when you click on this, it starts this particular function or process to happen for the JavaScript to then outputs whatever in our little screen. Does that make sense? Do you guys, for the most part, do you understand how we got to where we see what's on the screen? Anybody want to talk about it real quick? You have questions about it? Is anyone completely lost, has no idea what any of this was or what it meant?
Sounds like you're doing a solid job here, Craig.
I know, man. I did so well. They have no questions. Everyone's just like, I got it, and they don't. They want to be really humble.
C. Salcetta asks, "What was the last change you did on CSS?" And Lauren asks, "Can I see the CSS again?"
Yeah. Let me switch. The last change I did on CSS. Let me look at it and see if I can remember. You guys see the CSS? Okay, so let's just run through it. So the body itself with the background, right? So it's the color behind the calculator, and it fills up the whole screen. Then the grid itself, just to make sure it stays in the center. We set up the grid template for columns and rows because we wanted to separate those buttons instead of being in a straight line into separate rows and columns. Then this section here, we specified the actual the pointer, the size of the font, the border around the buttons, the colors. Then on hover, it changes to this color. The span 2, we were being specific because we have a couple of these buttons that are bigger. We want them to take up a number 2 size on the grid instead of a single. The output is the black window at the top where we see the numbers. Right now there's just placeholders for the zeros, but that's why it's got a black background. The grid column, it's using, this is going to set up like where the grid starts and ends so that it knows where those numbers are going to display inside of that grid. Flex is so that it knows to use flex, so we can use flex end and space around, and column, which are all commands or whatever for using flex, because we wanted these numbers to show up on the right side, one at the top and one below it, so they both line up and stay to the right. No matter how long the number gets, it's always buffered to the right side. And then with the word wrap and word break, so that if the number keeps getting bigger, it's always going to wrap. Wrap to the next line and keep going if it has to. And then the actual numbers that show up right now, they're placeholders. One of them is a little bit smaller, like a grayish color, and the other one is a white and a little bit bigger. So somewhere in there, I had I think it was I had a typo or something in there that when I fixed it is when everything like lined up. When I refreshed that page and when it went from being looked like, SpongeBob to a calculator, then this looked prettier, right? So I'm curious if I take the placeholder, let me try this. I'm going to put a whole bunch. There we go. So instead of just a couple zeros, you see how it wrapped to another line? And then I'm going to do the same thing. The other one. There. So basically, if you were to put in some ridiculously long number, I don't know why you would do that, but if you did, it would basically increase the size of this whole entire top of the calculator to where it would accommodate for the numbers, right? You wouldn't like run out of room, right? Now, something else, and we'll get into this later, the JavaScript side of it's going to be like a completely different ballgame because it's going to be a lot of logic and things because we're calculating. We have to tell it to take something and then use an operand with it to plus or minus or multiply, whatever, but also to store it in the current with the current operand, to take that and then put it into the previous, so that if we're adding like something plus something minus something times something divided by something, that it's going to keep up with all that, right? So when we work on that tomorrow and that logic on that tomorrow, we'll kind of go over why when you input certain things, what JavaScript has to do to output what you want, right? So like I said, this is right now, all those zeros I did were just all placeholders. There we go, back to that. So, all right, what do you guys think? Did this help at all? Did you learn anything? Did it make sense if you were to make a project? Does this seem like it made sense, like the process of setting up and as you change stuff, and then as you manipulate the CSS and start customizing how things look? Does it?
Yeah, I learned a ton. I mean, this is it.
Cool. Lauren, how do you know when to use grid versus Flexbox? Okay, well, grid, I would say probably when you're wanting to do more like rows and columns of something, like center or line up something. I don't know, maybe you're doing like little thumbnails on a web page and you want the little pictures to all line up together and be in a certain area together. Whereas Flexbox, maybe you're trying to get several things into the same area, but you want them to sit a certain way, like to the side of each other or above and below each other, or kind of, you know, left side, right side, maybe. Probably could Google that. I bet you there's probably a good explanation. So what else? Anyone else? Wasn't too bad. It ended up being what, extra 30 minutes longer because we finished, which is fine. I'd rather finish. I don't care.
Yeah, this is solid.
My phone is like got a mind of its own. Okay, I'm unsharing now. So 14. So we only lost 6 people. So I only killed 6 people with my CSS. You know, percentage wise, I think we did all right. If you count me and Melvin as 2, then there's still a dozen people in here. Okay. Lauren, I you know, it might just be preference. Maybe like the guy that made this, maybe the grid made more sense to use to center all of his rows and columns. But then when he wanted to tweak inside of a small area, you know, I'm not sure how basic you can break down the grid. I think it's pre-designated to be so many, like it'll block your create a grid on your screen, right? So maybe using the Flexbox was when he got down to that smaller area and he wanted to specifically move it around inside of a grid. So probably going to be playing around with it. I know people that have done Flexbox Froggy and Grid Garden and some of that stuff to the where they almost like went crazy trying to figure out. And other people said you finally just kind of get it and it makes sense how you're aligned stuff. You beat them both, yeah. Otherwise, if you guys want to, tomorrow night we're going to do the JavaScript part of this and kind of finish this off. And like I said, you're welcome to check out the GitHub or the YouTube for tonight, and then the YouTube for tomorrow. If you want to try to recreate this, you can make it your own. You can tweak it. You can change it. You can make the buttons different sizes and the different colors and you can make the buttons circles if you want. I mean, that's the fun of working on projects. You can play around. I encourage you to go in and play around and change stuff. You know, change that flex stuff, change the CSS grid stuff, make it a different number or something, and play around and see what happens when you change it. Like, oh man, that made that real big, or that real small, or that moved it way over here, right? That's how you're going to learn how to use it. And then later, maybe you're not making a calculator, but maybe you want to make a nice landing page or a portfolio page for yourself, and you want all your stuff to be lined up a certain way or look a certain way. Or I actually made a gradient generator. I think it's on my Netlify, but I'll try to see if I can find that for tomorrow night to show you guys. But basically, you input like the colors you want, like the 2 colors you want, and it'll give you the RGB on how to fade that across your screen. So if you want a certain area or the background or a section, and you want it to have a gradient like that, you can create your own. It'll generate. It's a generator. So I'll show that to you later. Otherwise, anything? Comments?
Yeah, Craig. What was the name of the link or the website that you were saying that we could find the Fizzbox stuff on?
Flexbox.
The last, no, Fizzbox.
Fizzbuzz.
Yeah.
We did Fizzbuzz on the JavaScript. It was from the Code Wars. So if you go to codewars.com and then you search for Fizzbuzz, you should be able to find it. There's a YouTube video of it under Career Karma Workshops. I think it actually has Fizzbuzz in the title. I think, doesn't it, Melvin? I think it does. If you want to watch the walkthrough on it, But if you want to actually do FizzBuzz on Code Wars, just go to Code Wars and in the little search thing, search for FizzBuzz.
Okay. I
FizzBuzz,
wanted
if
to
you,
just
yeah, go ahead.
try it and see what it's like to
Yep.
try.
Well, it's a good one because with all the things you have to do to solve it, it's good practice for using like loops and iterating through and a counter and index and if else loops or if else statements. Excuse me, for loops. FizzBuzz is something you will probably someday see on a coding challenge for something. Maybe a job interview,
Okay.
maybe something, or a variation of it. Might not be FizzBuzz. It could be called something else, right? But definitely a good coding challenge, I would say, to be familiar with, because you're probably going to see a variation of it someday.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. YouTube for this. Give us a couple days, and this will be up on Workshops and YouTube. And then when we post it, I'll make sure we put in the description below the other walkthrough of it. If you guys want to watch the one that's on, actually, I'll just tell you real quick if you want. WebDev Simplified. If you find him on YouTube, there's a build a calculator with JavaScript tutorial, which is the same calculator. Like I said, this ain't mine. I'm not going to pretend to take credit for it, right? So yeah, instead of saying, hey, everybody, go to this YouTube and watch this walkthrough, instead we're doing it this way, right? We're talking about it. We're walking through it and talking about it as a group, because that's how we're going to get better as a community, right? Help each other. So, cool.
Any other questions? All right. I think this is a good wrap up for tonight's workshop. Craig, thank you so much for this. That was awesome. Huge value add.
I hope it was helpful. Somebody like I said, I mean, if you can forgive me for not being, if you guys can, put up with my kind of stumbling and stammering them, because I didn't have a lot of time to prepare, I apologize. But aside from that, as long as you got something from this, or if it gave you ideas to try something else or play around with something else, I think it's always, as long as we're moving forward, right? As long as we're taking steps forward to progress and get better and learn something. And that's why I'm trying to help.
Yeah, and also for the people that are on this call, just like I've mentioned before, Craig has stepped up to the plate, right? Like, he's a very active community member at Career Karma. He's a coach. He has his own YouTube channel, right? Like, he's actively creating his own personal brand by just coming on here, sharing his knowledge, and ultimately, like, he'll be able to point to these pieces of evidence to potential employers or people that he wants to work with in the future. And these are wonderful, like, little snippets of like how Craig thinks, and like he's so willing to like give back. Look at all of these like workshops and things that he's been hosting. With that, there's actually a lot of value in taking what Craig has imparted on us tonight and taking action on that. And maybe, like, trying your hand at creating your own JavaScript, or your own first web app with the calculator, and trying your hand at that, and then posting that on like the Career Karma's portfolio's discussion page. That's a very solid first step, and you'll always have like these pieces of tangible evidence to kind of document your journey, so to speak. So Craig, thank you again so much for everything that you did tonight. And be sure to register for tomorrow's event where he kind of builds upon this. So yeah, I think that this is a solid wrap up for tonight.
Can I add something to what you just said, Melvin, too?
Sure.
I think, who was it, Lauren earlier, or somebody had asked me about the percentage button, right? So I would challenge, if you feel fairly comfortable with HTML, CSS, and even the JavaScript, or after tomorrow night, I would even give you that challenge to take this project and go in and figure out how to add one more button. Go in and figure out how to add that percentage button down there, maybe where the equals button is, cut it in half and make 2 buttons, right? And add that to the project. I think that would be a really good thing to try to work out and figure out, because to do a percentage, what do you multiply something? I'm trying to remember by, 0.001 or whatever the formula is to get a percentage from a number, right? There's going to be a function you can create in JavaScript that'll do that. And you have all these other examples of these operands you can use. I would say if you build this calculator, by the time we're done with it, by the time tomorrow, you could use that as your own project to go in and figure out how to add that, or even pi, right? How to figure out how to add another button. When you click it, it multiplies by pi, right? Just like a calculator. I don't know. Just throwing that out there. You can always make stuff your own and tweak it and change it and add to it. And that goes for to-do apps and any other kind of projects you find out there online. So, sorry.
Yeah, that's actually great. I challenge all of you guys to go ahead and do that. And let us know what you think. Like, give us feedback on like how this workshop went. Post your, projects. I'd really love to see that, these are going a long way. So thank you all again for joining us tonight. And I think this is a good breakdown, a good ending for tonight. And until tomorrow night.
Thanks,
Thank
Melvin.
you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Have a good night. Let's break in.